Marshfield, philosopher-in-chief of the Lawn Chair Philosophy Foundation. I'm teaching a couple classes and I need to do some videos on Plato and Aristotle and a few other videos as well. So we've got a whole series of things I need to do for class, but that I am appropriating for this nonprofit. Isn't that great? Isn't that fun? Woo! I'm looking a little ragged. It's been a long Monday, but we're going to push on through and start with Plato. We're going to do just a brief overview of his whole philosophy. Woo! It's going to be a ride, and that will set us up for a little bit of Aristotle. I might do that tonight. I might do it in another session. If you see me in a different outfit, it's a different day. Not that that matters. Let's get started. Plato. Plato has a tripartite notion of the soul or of the psyche. Now, this soul can be thought of as a mind that's separate from the body. People have dualistic readings of Plato, but I just want to say that in ancient philosophy, we don't have the strict division between body and mind that we find in modern philosophy, which starts around the 16th century. That strict division that we see in Descartes, we have inherited and taken on in our psychological practices and our philosophies. Let's not try to read that distinction so sharply into Plato, I must say. So anyways, we've got a tripartite system. There's the rational part of the soul. There is the appetitive part of the soul. And there is the spirited part of the soul. Each part of the soul desires something different from this world, whether it be material or immaterial, something of this world. And each part of the soul motivates our actions. It's as if these different parts of the soul are in conflict with each other, fighting over you and what you're going to go after, what will motivate your actions and what it is you're trying to achieve with those actions. Plato wants us to harmonize the different parts of the soul so that we might achieve eudaimonia, which is a sort of happiness. I hope that you can see that on the board. I'm trying to look in this camera. Maybe you can see it, maybe you can't. If you can't, or if you can and my handwriting's a mess, please reach out with questions. I would love to answer them. Have a discussion. We'll sit down, we'll talk. But eudaimonia, that's what we want to achieve, a sort of harmony. Eudaimonia is a type of happiness, but not just a feeling of happiness, nothing fleeting. This is a substantial happiness that lasts. For Plato, this eudaimonia comes when each part of the soul is getting a little bit of what it wants. It's a life of moderation and of spiritual completion, how it is we become whole and harmonized. And we're going to go on a wild roller coaster ride trying to achieve this eudaimonia. The rational part of the soul will spearhead the campaign to eudaimonia, and we'll see why in just a sec. Okay, let's look at what each part of the soul desires, and then we'll see how the rational part of the soul leading the way will lead to eudaimonia. Everybody getting a little bit of what we want here. Okay, so the rational part of the soul desires to know. It wants wisdom. But it doesn't want to stop there. It also wants to govern. It wants to tell everybody else what to do. All right. Govern. Let's use a different color. The appetitive part, it desires to consume. Now, this could be eating. It could be drinking. We could also, anything that we might become addicted to. Facebook. Social media, we might consume other people's emotions. We might be a soul vampire. I don't know what it is you're trying to consume. It's very materialistic, the appetitive part of the soul. We could be physically consuming or emotionally consuming. However it is, we might consume the appetitive desires to do it. Okay, and then let's do a different color. Oh, I think the only one left that I have is black, so we'll go back to black. The spirited part, it loves drama. It desires motion, action, a reason to get out of bed in the morning. So, you know, a life without a little bit of action in it, what is that? Dull. A human being, a human psyche needs a little bit of motion, a little bit of action in order to feel whole. So, an imbalanced soul might have too much of a rational, it might be dominated by this rational part. So you might be super studious and study all the time, but maybe you forget to eat, maybe you forget to drink, maybe you forget to take your medicine in the morning and you end up doing a video at night where you're going 10 million miles an hour. You've got an overdriven, rational part of the soul. Or maybe you're somebody that likes to tell everybody what to do, and you try to control yourself in every thought, in every action, and touch the light a couple of times before you go to bed, else the whole world will explode. If you're like me, I don't know, I'm working on it. So that's an overdriven, an overgrown, rational portion. Maybe if your appetitive is too much, you might drink too much, eat too much, spend too much time on the social media or on Reddit or wherever else that you're wasting your time. The spirited part, if there's too much of a spirited part of your soul, if you are motivated by an overactive spirited portion, you might be running into situations with guns ablaze and kicking down the door, asking questions later. You're quick to anger. So the spirited part is always in a fight. I could see myself in any of these overactive parts. And maybe one day you've got too much rational influence. Maybe the next day you have too much spirited. We could also be imbalanced if there's not enough. Oops, I gotta check my computer, make sure it's still on so that this keeps going. We could have too little of something. So maybe if you are like, well, excuse me, I just want to use the bathroom. Is it okay? Is somebody in that stall? I don't know. Spirited portion. You need more spirited portion. Or maybe if you're like, oh, but I have this food I haven't eaten all day, but these folks here are even more hungry than me, and so I'm going to give them everything that I have, and then, oh, now I don't have anything left. I'm kind of hungry. You're not thinking of yourself enough. You've got an underactive appetitive part, and that rational part, if you're like, I'd rather just not know and keep going, or if you have no control whatever over your environment, like say you're a leader and you need to tell people what to do, and you're like, hey, do you think you could get that report to me by 5? No. Oh, that's okay. No. You need to demand, you need to lead, however it is. So you can be too far in one direction or the other direction, too much rational, too little rational, too much appetitive, too little appetitive, too much spirited or too little spirited, and you're out of balance. We want balance and moderation. Eudaimonia will come with moderation. Okay, so Plato's going to say that in order for all of the parts to get what they need, the rational part needs to take the reins. It needs to lead. It wants to govern anyway, so why not let it do what it wants to do in order to lead these other parts of the soul. In the Republic, Plato talks about this sort of division between the rational part and these parts of the soul. This is called the more beastly part. And he makes a metaphor, he makes an analogy between these parts of the soul, the lower parts of the soul, and a lion, a beast. You want to befriend that lion. The rational part, though it wants to govern and be a lion tamer, it can't lead with an iron fist. The rational part needs to convince, the lower parts of the soul to get on board with its program. So the rational part doesn't want to beat the beast into submission. It wants to befriend the beast. And don't you want a lion behind you at all times? Yeah, you do. Okay, so you want to befriend the beast. So the rational part is going to have to go on a whole epic spirit quest in order to be in a position to unite these two lower parts of the soul, to get them to stop quibbling with each other, and lead the whole person, the whole psyche, to a state of eudaimonia, a sustained state, a perduring state. Okay, another these synonyms. Cinnamon, yeah, I'll have to cut this out. Okay, so this wild spirit quest that the rational part needs to go on. This is where Plato's notion of the forms comes into play. Stay with me here. The forms are ideas or ideals. They are unchanging. They are eternal, immutable forms. They do not exist in this material realm, and in certain ways, they don't exist at all. For Plato, what becomes is, and what does not become is not, at least in the way that we understand existence as we experience it. The forms are more real than this material existence, even though they do not exist in the same way that flesh and blood people and psyches do. So this realm of the forms, it's perfect, a perfect ideal world. We have in this ideal world the highest of all ideas, which is the good. There is a hierarchy to the forms, which means that Plato believes that in an ideal world there is a hierarchy. Whether that's problematic or not, I'll leave that up to you to decide. But the good is the highest of all the forms. It governs all of the forms. The realm of the forms is the domain of the good. It holds sovereign dominion over all of the other forms. Just under the good is beauty. The good is beautiful. And by this beauty, we don't mean, oh, that's so pretty. It shines. It's resplendent. This beauty is mathematical. It's proportionate. It's ratio. It's ratio. The good is what unites all things, all many things into one space, really. So there is a good for everything, and the underlying idea of goodness that might be predicated of all things can be traced back to this one good. That good is beautiful, it's mathematically perfect, and the way that the good relates all things together is mathematically, and beauty serves that role of uniting. And that will come into play in the Schiller series that I'm doing kind of right now. The next episode will come, don't worry. Next underneath that is justice. And then further down the line, we have other forms. Now, it is unclear in the literature whether there is a form for everything. Might be a form of markers, a form of erasers. There might be a form or an idea that corresponds to cows, a form that corresponds to chickens, a form that corresponds to tractors. I don't know. There might be a form to molecules and atoms and quarks and whatever else is going on down there in the subatomic realm. We don't know. It could also be the fact that there are a limited number of forms that inform all little things or big things, anything. Scholars are debating about that still, thousands of years later. For our purposes here, just know that the good is the highest of all the forms. Beauty comes next, then we have justice. Okay. Plato believes that the rational part of the soul is the only part that has access to this realm of ideas. We can reach this realm through a sort of contemplation. We'll get into the method of how we reach those forms in a little bit, but just roll with that for now. The rational part of the soul has access to these ideals, this perfect world that is ordered in a hierarchical manner and a pattern that is set for all of time, unchanging. And once the rational part of the soul beholds this good, it falls down prostrate and is enveloped in amazement at its power, at its majesty, at its very goodness, its beauty, and how it leads to justice. Oh my gosh. I don't even know what to do. I'm just in awe. But once it comes back down to earth, usually by some, I don't know, attention grabbing gesture of the lower parts of the soul, it gets right back down to earth it comes. It has an idea of the good now. When the rational part understands the good for all things, according to Plato, now it knows what's good for itself. It knows what's good for the appetitive. It knows what's good for the spirited. It knows that moderation of consumption is good for the appetitive. It knows that a moderation of a little drama, a little action is good for the spirited. It knows that a path towards wisdom is good for the rational. So this path of becoming wise is going to take a whole lifetime, according to Plato. I mean, if we were gods, we wouldn't need to go on this trek to know. We would just already know. So this wisdom is a continual process, and it will involve, oops, let me get this. It will involve knowing how to put into action that good. So there's a certain theoretical wisdom happening here with the rational part, and wisdom will also involve the active practice of governing and applying that good. So that's a continual practice of knowing the good, coming back down to earth and applying it, going back up again, and hopefully you're following a rising road to the end of your life, and that your state of eudaimonia just grows and grows and grows. Yes, well, I'll get back to the method in a little bit, but let's roll with this. Okay, let's say, yes, the rational part has gone on a spirit quest. It knows the good of all things, and it comes back down to earth and sees that it needs a moderation of knowledge, wisdom, and governance, that the appetitive needs a moderation of consumption, that the spirited part needs a moderation of drama, motion, and action. How are we going to achieve that? Well, we put a restrictor plate on that race car, if you will allow me that metaphor, please. I'm from Virginia. My family's from West Virginia. That's such a great metaphor. We apply a virtue to each part of the soul that will allow it to achieve moderation, a mean for each of these. We have the ultimate mean, and by that we mean a mathematical mean that we can then apply to each part. So in order to achieve moderation, a mean, the good for the rational, we need to transmute it through the virtue of wisdom, which it already desires in the first place. But wisdom is a virtue. It's something that we want to achieve, but it is also a sort of function that we can place upon the activity of that rational part that will lead it towards its good. The appetitive part, the virtue that we need for that, is temperance. A different sort of moderation. So once we siphon that appetitive part of the soul through temperance, it can achieve a good, a little bit of what it needs without taking away from the needs of the other parts of the soul. the part of the spirited part of the soul, we need the virtue of courage. Through that virtue, the spirited part can achieve a little bit of what it needs without taking away from the other parts. So we have a top-down subjugation of the other parts of the soul when the rational part applies this good to each part. But Plato wants us to understand that subjugation as befriending the part of the soul. That subjugation will come into play when we talk about his politics. You know, I'll leave the conclusions up to you. But anyways, so through the virtue of wisdom, the rational part can know it's good. Through the virtue of temperance, the appetitive part can know it's good. And through courage, the spirited part can know it's good. I should say a little bit about courage. What we mean by that is, again, a sort of temperance. Wisdom is a temperance, knowing the good and how to use it. Temperance itself is a temperance. Not eating too much, not eating too little. The courage here, yes, it means to be brave in the face of danger and whatever it is that you fear, but it is a sort of moderation. If somebody has a gun in a knife fight and all you've come in is with a stick that you have turned into a shiv, the courageous thing to do might be to run away and go, you know what, I'm going to pick my battles, and this gun person at a knife fight is not who I want to be messing with. So courage doesn't always need to look like standing up and doing what's right every single time and fighting evil. We're not that. We're not there. That sort of courage is irrational, according to Plato. So the type of courage that we want is knowing when to fight and when to step back, how to pick our battles. Yes, and that will involve a courage of looking at yourself. It takes a lot of courage to look at yourself and say, you know what, I might be a little too much right now, or I might be a little too little right now, and I need to do X, Y, and Z to resolve that state, whatever. So courage, temperance, wisdom, all sorts of means, mathematical means, but also lived means. We are in balanced. And once each part of the soul achieves that virtue, not only has it been siphoned through that virtue, but it achieves that state, we now have a just soul. There is justice, there is balance. So the form of justice is informed by a mathematical mean, by balance, by ratio, harmony. Yes, so justice, we're going to define that in terms of balance and in terms of achieving this state of eudaimonia. Okay, so how does the rational part of the soul make it to this realm of the forms, this immaterial realm, this eternal realm, something that's unchanging? My goodness, what are we going to do? We're going to use what is called the Elencus. I like the term divine method. It's much more fun. The term divine method shows up in the Symposium, but Plato also mentions this method as an Elencus in his Timaeus. Timaeus, I'm from Virginia, that's how I'm going to say it. I don't care if that's not how you say it. Timaeus. It looks like Timaeus, whatever. We're going to explore that divine method. It's going to help us understand how to come to an understanding of this good, and I'm going to reference the story that's told in the Symposium to explain that. So let me erase this and I'll get back. So the divine method, I'm going to just lay out the steps, then we're going to do it backwards, and then we're going to come back to this model of the soul and go it forwards. We'll know it backwards and forwards. We're going to go it forwards. How about that for highfalutin talk? I can be trusted with your mind. Okay, so the first step in the divine method is to establish an object of inquiry. Establish an object of inquiry. Okay. We're going to start, here's our object of inquiry. Step number 2. We're going to divide that object into its 2 most fundamental and opposing parts. Divide that object into its 2 most fundamental and opposing parts. I've abbreviated for the sake of space and for the sake of my head. It's been a long day. Next, so here we go. This is our diagram. We're dividing it into its 2 most fundamental and opposing parts. 3. Measure the dialogue between those parts. Measure the dialogue between the 2. And if you look at most of Plato's writing, we have, the interlocutor, Socrates, and then there's a dialogue between the parts, even though, here's our dialogue between the 2. Now, even though these are represented on an equal plane, if you read Plato's dialogue, Socrates is usually closer to the truth than the other. So this is not an equal proportion. In their dialogue, the ratio between the 2 parts, computer, is not going to be a 1-to-1 or a 1-to-2 octave, if you will. We're going to be dividing this up, and one part will be more dominant than the other. So establish your object of inquiry, divide it into its 2 most fundamental and opposing parts, and measure the dialogue between the 2. Those of you who are interested in Pythagoras will see his influence on Plato here. The triangle. Oh, I could get so derailed. Let me not. Okay, so we could also take any of these 2 points, do the same thing. All right, I want to make this my object of inquiry. I can divide that into 2 fundamental and opposing parts and measure the dialogue between the 2. How about that? And I could go ad infinitum doing that. And have a way back to that initial point. It's organized, it's logical. Even though Plato is not operating in the sort of logic that his student Aristotle created, that's that specific science, there is a method to his madness, there is a logic here. And this method, this practical method, is informed by the grand logos or order that the good possesses and imposes, or anyways. So that good actually informs these universal motions of the heavens, and if we can align ourselves with those motions, then we might achieve eudaimonia more efficiently. But let me not get derailed with that either. I'm going to try to stay quick and dirty with this. Here is the divine method. Let's do it backwards, and then we'll get back to applying this to the soul. So in the symposium, there's a question about, well, what is love and what is beauty? And in this dialogue, I think it's one of the only dialogues where Socrates doesn't have an answer. He goes, you know what? I'm not so sure about love and beauty, but let me tell you what Diotima, this wild, crazy lady, what's it called? She's a oracle. That's the word. She's an oracle, and Socrates went to her and she divined this answer, and Socrates was like, oh, the answer. Okay, yes. So she says to Socrates, and then Socrates says to the drinking party, what you got to do is you got to find a body that you find beautiful, and you need to get to know that body You get to know that body well. And then after that, you go, you know what? That was a beautiful body. That was a beautiful body right there. But there's this other body. It's a completely different body. It's also beautiful. It might be the complete opposite of the body that you knew before, but you're attracted to it. So you just let yourself be led by that desire. And you get to know that second body. You get to know it well. And then you stop and go, wait a minute. These two are opposite bodies, yet they're both beautiful. I'm going to combine them into a set. All right. So now I've got my one body and two body in there. Oh, wait, here comes a third body. Woo, I like that body. I don't know, it's completely different than these other two bodies that I loved previously, that I got to know previously. I'm going to get to know this third body. What is it about these bodies that they're so different, but I can call them each beautiful? I don't know yet. I'm still young. I don't have a lot of experience, so I'm just going to add this to my set. Oh, here comes another body. Oh, and you get to know that body, you love that body, and so on and so forth until you're old and you've got like a bunch of bodies under your belt. Plato is all about having a good time, not monogamous. So at the end of your life, you've exhausted your desires, and you look back at these very different bodies, fundamentally opposing bodies, and how is it that we can call each of them beautiful? Well, at this point in our life, when we're no longer encumbered by such wild desires, we can reflect at the connecting object of inquiry, which is beauty, the idea of beauty itself. And once we know the idea of, beauty itself, well, that's right underneath the good. This is our gateway into the good. Woo! How about that for a method? That's how we come to understand beauty and the good, and how it is we can allow our natural desires to lead to a life of the intellect and to a life of wisdom, so long as along the way we're stopping to go, wonder what's going on here. So, okay, that's the presentation of the divine method in the symposium, and that I like that name because whenever you search it on Google, or that term, you search it on Google and his method doesn't come up. It's a whole bunch of other stuff. So I like to throw my students off by calling it the divine method, but oh my gosh, it's just so much more fun to say the divine method. It comes from Diotima. She divined it. But he writes about it in the Timaeus as well in a more scientific and sober way. Let's take a look at that and how this relates to the soul. Now, again, there are three parts to the soul. One part was rational, but the other two were also beastly. So in thinking about our object of inquiry, this psyche, there are two fundamental and opposing parts. We have the rational part, and then we have the beastly part. We want to understand the dialogue between the two, because the rational part, it does need to be receptive. That's something special about Plato's notion of reason, that it is receptive. It needs to listen to the needs of the other parts of the soul, even though it's subjecting them to a good, to underneath a good. And again, let's go ahead and divide this into two fundamental and opposing parts, because we have the appetitive and the spirited part as well. And in order to understand the dialogue between the beastly part as a whole and the rational part, we need to understand these two subparts as well. So we can use this divine method to come to understand dialectically our object of inquiry. So Plato's dialogues, they embody this process, which is for Plato scientific, but also divine at the same time. Okay, so whenever we implement this method of inquiry. We are able to come to understand uniting principles that unite all things, okay? So beauty plays an important role, I should say, again, in helping us to understand the good. We want to be in a beautiful state. A state of beauty is one in which we're unencumbered. We can't achieve in this world a beautiful state that is prolonged into infinity. Some conflict will emerge and we'll have to stop and go, wait a minute, let me balance myself out again. Let me use this dialectic method, the divine method, the Ilenkus, and I'll get myself back on track to eudaimonia. But this method is how the rational part will unlock this realm of the forms. So real quick, I'm going to go over Plato's politics and how it relates to the parts of the soul, and then that'll be it for Plato, our quick and dirty Plato less. Okay, so let's review our parts of the soul. I'm going to come back here. We've got the rational part. We've got the appetitive. And we have the spirited. What was the virtue that we needed to moderate that spirited? Courage. What do we need for the appetitive? Temperance. What do we need for the rational? We need wisdom. And then once each part of the soul has achieved its respective state, it has achieved a virtuous state, then we have a just state of the soul. And I can get down with that. Oh, my computer, gosh. I have to make sure that we're still plugged in. So I can get down with, hey, there are different dimensions of myself, and each of those dimensions has a different desire or is motivated by a different desire. Its domain is delineated by a certain activity or desire, and that can be conflicting. And I feel this inner conflict in myself, and I'd like for it to be resolved so that I can be a reasonable, rational human being who leads a good life, an enviable life, if we will. Eudaimonia also has that aspect to it as well. It's a sort of sustained happiness of moderation, and it should lead to an enviable life. How about that, Joneses? What are you going to do, huh? But when we take that model of individual harmony and project it onto a political state, we get something kind of problematic. You will see this throughout the history of Western philosophy. A nice method of self-improvement, not that we want to reduce this to mere self-improvement. There's something metaphysical, epistemological, there's something more happening here than just self-help. But I mean, really, that's what it comes down to. Plato wants to help you get to a state of eudaimonia here. But you'll see this throughout Western philosophy, taking that method of helping the individual, imposing it on the whole state, and then we get something that looks like fascism. So for Plato, he believes that we can achieve a just political state, a city-state, by using the same method. He equates the rational part of the soul, or at least analogously, to the ruling elite. Those who know and have the capability to govern ought to govern. And just saying that isn't too bad. But let's go further. The appetitive part, he relates that to the merchant class. For our purposes here, maybe we can say middle class. I don't want to do that because then it makes it the spirited part not seem part of the middle class. But those who are involved in material activities. We're not legislating laws for the whole city-state at this level or at the spirited level. We're just involved in our own business. In the spirited portion, this is the warrior class. Yeah, so the ruling elite legislate, create laws, but not, what's the word? Arbitrarily. These aren't arbitrary rules. This rational elite knows the mathematical good of all things, and knows what's good for the appetitive, and knows what's good for the spirited. So it's coming from a place of wisdom, and imposes rules that should allow for the appetitive to just do its thing, and for the spirited part to just do its thing, or the merchants and the warriors to just do their thing. The imagination plays an interesting role here, especially for the spirited part. We need a sort of divine representative to help us rally the troops, we'll say. So we could think of Athena, the patron saint, if you will, of Athens, the goddess Athena, goddess of wisdom, and so on and so forth. So in order to make sure that the spirited part, the warrior class, protects from outside forces as well as protect from inside threats, we have this this goddess who may or may not be real. I'm not here to say, I'm not here to judge on that, but this figure helps to inform the warrior part. Like, we are doing this for Athena, and it helps inform the merchant class who, may not have the knowledge of the ruling elite, but they recognize what Athena represents. And the rational part, the ruling elite, they know they can govern, but they also see how Athena is a good representation for these lower classes. So whether the ruling elite actually believe in Athena, or they just promote this religious figure in order to keep order amidst lower parts of society, I'm not so sure. But listen to that, the lower parts of society. Look what Plato has done. There are lower parts of the soul. There are less than parts of society. Listen to this. The merchant class doesn't have access to the realm of the forms. They can't fully govern themselves. Neither can the warrior class. Only those who have the capacity to reach this realm of the forms can rule. How do you know whether somebody has the capacity to reach this realm of the forms to which we cannot actually point? What are we talking about here? I don't know. I go back and forth about this because, I look at some leaders today and I think, who put them in charge? They don't know what it is that they're doing, and they cannot even govern themselves. But I have a real problem with the lower part of the soul and the lower part of society. And these folks don't have the capacity to be fully rational, and so they must have rational people leading them so that they can achieve eudaimonia, even though they won't be able to do so individually. So through representational religious figures, through laws that represent the forms, and through architecture, and we can create a society where the forms are present any which way that you turn. Plato was not that big of a fan of poets. He was all about censorship. Only the right type of art is allowed in a just state. Ones that embody the forms and coming to know the forms and the right type of courage. We don't want these wild epics stirring up wild emotions and getting people to fight against this order. No. So, through the right architecture, think about it. Look at the Parthenon here, bam, bam, bam. When you walk into this space, with its beautiful columns and geometrical precision there, you are transformed in a way by that space. The shape of the space shapes how you think, and so the rational ruling elite wants to create these geometrically perfect buildings for the lower folk to walk into and then to be ordered by it, to play certain music that will keep people in order. Interesting enough, so I'm a drummer, and I got really into researching this. There were certain types of rhythms that were allowed in Plato's just state, and other types of rhythms which were not. The dithyramb of Dionysus, not allowed here. He liked very steady rhythms. I would say that Plato would have been a big fan of Mozart, but would not have liked Beethoven. So anyways, through literal architectural shapes, the way that we shape our physical buildings that sort of delineate our city-state here, through the art that we can create and the sort of religion that we can practice, we can inform the masses with the forms, whether they realize that's what's happening or not. Anywhere you turn, you'll get smacked in the face with the forms through the laws. You'll get smacked in the face with the forms through the architecture. You'll get smacked in the face with the forms through all cultural activities. It's top down. Everything is organized. It reminds me about working at the Cracker Barrel. If you'll allow me this, you know what? I worked for 7 years as a waitress at the Cracker Barrel. They had everything down to a T. I've gone into Cracker Barrels recently. I think after the pandemic, they got a little loose with things, but it was very, I mean, they had their P's and Q's and I's dotted and T's crossed. My goodness. The colors of your uniform that you could wear matched the sugar and the sugar caddies. When you first walk into the store, they have the space set up so that you would spend more money while you're waiting on your table. The way that they placed the workers in there and the way that they placed their displays led to more spending. You know, so the scripts that the wait staff comes at you with, also in line with their whole vision. You need to be country fresh. You need to have your apron ironed with a nice crease there, and all this order allowed for the events to unfold in such a way where we achieved a just state. But that sort of attention to detail, where the shirt that you're wearing matches the sugar caddy, and the organization of the sugar caddy, the geometric shape and layout of the dining room, it complements, that's the word I was thinking for, complements what's happening in the front store. My goodness, that sort of attention to detail is what we see in Plato's Republic. So this is how his politics is shaped by his understanding of the soul. Now, Plato is being very reactionary here. He's writing at the sort of zenith and then fall of Athens. What's his name? Pericles. So Athens was a pure democracy, not like what we have here in America. It's a representative democracy, heavy on the representative side. And so in Athens, in order to have a quorum, you know, all the property-owning males would come in, and I think it was like either a 200 or 400 person quorum. Just imagine that, hundreds of people coming in, all of the energy that's there. How do you focus all of those opinions and voices and all their spirited and appetitive and whatever it is that they're thinking? How do you unite that all together and have a civil conversation? Oh my gosh, that just seems wild. So the democracy begins to get a little overgrown. There's a fervor amidst bubbling in the demos. And then Pericles, who is a decorated leader, a warrior, what do we call him? Maybe a sergeant, maybe he's a general, I don't know. He led in war. and was successful, he decides, you know what, I need a little bit more glory and honor. So let's go ahead and use all of our resources to start a war with Troy. Edit, Sparta. What was I thinking? That movie, Troy. It gets on my brain. So let's back up. Pericles, he's a decorated veteran. He led Athens in a series of successful battles, and he goes, you know what? I want a little bit more glory to my name than what these victories have afforded me. Let me go into this very chaotic demos and use rhetoric to whip up the masses and to get them on board with my program. And so he convinces everybody to send all the young men from Athens and fight Sparta. Why? Because Athena. Because we are Athenians and we represent the intellect, and we are just better than the Spartans, who have more beastly values than we do. They're militaristic. We are cultured. So upon those grounds alone, Pericles sends the young men to Sparta, and they get their asses handed to them. Sparta kicks their ass. Pericles is like, oh no, what do we do? I'm gonna go back to the demos and I'm gonna ask for more men. So he sends more men at the problem. But then a plague hits. Oh my gosh. All of our young men are dying. There's a plague here, and we have no more resources to address this plague because we've used all of our resources to start a war with Sparta on the grounds of Athena. Does this sound familiar? Ooh. So, anyways, Alcibiades was a young man who actually was in the symposium. He sought Socrates' affections, but Socrates is like, I'm of the mind. I'm not of pederasty. You can go yourself. Alcibiades didn't like that, but Alcibiades was wild. So he's fighting for Sparta, and he sees, oh my gosh, we're getting our asses kicked, and was a Spartan sympathizer. He gets caught, and Alcibiades is like, no, it wasn't me, it was Socrates. Socrates made me do it. And then so Socrates is brought on trial for corrupting the youth, and then he gets sentenced, and he goes, well, I'll die and be a martyr. More on that in later videos, or you can look that up yourself. So Alcibiades and his wild ass leads to the martyrdom of Socrates. Here's something that I'm just going to go on this tangent. It's often, maybe not often, there are scholars who think that Plato is a Spartan sympathizer because this structure that he is proposing is wildly different from the pure democracy that Athens had at the time. He wants to propose a more rigid structure that Sparta actually had. This resembles more of what's going on in Sparta's government than it does Athens' government at the time. There's this theory that Socrates might have been a Spartan sympathizer, and so that's why he was put on trial. Maybe that Spartan sympathizer charge was brought on because of Alcibiades. We weren't there, we don't know, but I get really excited about speculating on that fact. Anyways, there was good reason for Plato to propose a little bit more order, because look at where all that chaos got Athens. Nowhere. However, we might have gone a little too far in the other direction. Plato, oh my gosh, what happened to moderation? What happened to temperance? Just because there's a little bit of disorder doesn't mean we have to go into complete control issue mode, So, anyways, that's a very quick and dirty, broad view of Plato, tripartite soul. The rational part of that soul needs to go on an epic quest. We're going to use the divine method to get there. To the realm of the forms. We're going to understand the good. We're going to subject the beastly part of the soul underneath that good, and then we're going to achieve eudaimonia. And you know what? It works for the individual, so why not impose that order on the state? Proposes Plato. So that's that. Of course, there are much more, there's much more to the story, and so much more to look into. Plato is not just this quick and dirty story that I've just told, but that's enough to get you going, and happy studies. Hello. In my haste with this quick and dirty presentation of Plato, I forgot to mention a key term / concept, and that is Plato's philosopher king. Now, some scholars believe that by the ruling elite, Plato has in mind this philosopher king. Other scholars think that the philosopher king is separate from that ruling elite class that corresponds with the rational part of the soul and has transcended the restrictions of governmental state, the city state to begin with, and kind of acts as a go-between between the ruling elite and the lower class, sort of as an advisor, those who are actually ruling but are sort of behind the scenes. So a philosopher king, whether you are on the A side of the scholarly camp or the B side of the scholarly camp, where the A side thinks that the philosopher king is the ruling elite, and those who think that the ruling elite are still restricted by the state laws and that the philosopher king is beyond that in ruling, it's kind of subversively. The philosopher king is able to put into practice theoretical, speculative, maybe even wisdom, put it into practice by promulgating just law and ensuring the possibility for a just state. So keep that term in mind, the philosopher king, which is either synonymous with the ruling class or is outside of the hierarchies of his caste system. You can kind of go between, listen to everybody, put a whole picture presentation of the inner workings of the parts to deliver to the ruling elite so that they can promulgate just law. So that is helpful.